Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army. So, imagine you are working the front desk at a downtown shelter, right? It's a Tuesday night.
And knowing how these scenarios usually go, it's probably freezing outside.
Exactly. The temperature is dropping way below freezing. The door's open, and this man walks in. He's shivering. He looks totally exhausted, and he's wearing these sneakers that are basically completely held together by duct tape.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. His bare heels are literally exposed to the ice. And, I mean, your immediate, overwhelming human instinct in that moment is just to fix it.
Right. You want to give him a hot meal, a warm bed, maybe a brand new pair of boots.
Exactly. You hand them over, he walks away, and you feel this great sense of satisfaction, like you helped. But what if I told you that that simple, loving, intuitive act might actually be the exact thing keeping him trapped in a relentless cycle of poverty?
It completely shatters the paradigm, doesn't it? I mean, it's a really tough pill to swallow.
It really is. And, you know, whether you are actively working in urban ministry right now, or maybe managing a team in the corporate sector, or honestly, if you just want to understand the fundamental mechanics of how human beings relate to one another, we're about to look at the concept of helping through a radically different lens.
Yeah. Our focus today is diving into the principles laid out by Lorraine Minor in her book called Called to Serve, Servant Leadership, Jesus Style.
Okay. Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the core thesis here is it's going to make a lot of people pretty uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. It demands that we stop treating people as projects to be fixed with material goods. We have to start engaging with the incredibly messy, painful reality of their internal brokenness.
Let's jump right into the deep end of that discomfort, because when most of us hear the phrase rescue mission, the mental architecture we build is just entirely transactional.
Right. It's an equation.
Yeah. We picture a soup kitchen line or, rows of cots in a gymnasium. The whole operation just seems built on this idea of you lack a physical item, I provide the physical item, boom, problem solved. We view the mission as a dispensary for survival goods.
But Minor, she takes a sledgehammer to that equation. Because if you are just running a dispensary, you aren't actually running a rescue mission at all.
So before we can really understand the how of servant leadership, I think we have to understand the where and the why. Like, how did these missions even start?
Well, if we look closely at the historical DNA of these organizations, the dispensary model was never the goal. I mean, the very concept traces its roots back to Scotland, to the Glasgow City Mission, which was founded in 1826 by a guy named David Naismith.
1826, so we're talking right in the thick of the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. And Naismith wasn't just trying to hand out bread, He was attempting to engage the holistic spiritual and social crisis of that time. He actually went on to found the Dublin City Mission and then the London City Mission. And when this whole movement finally crossed the Atlantic to the U.S., around 1830 or so, it carried that same holistic intensity.
Which culminated in what is widely recognized as the oldest surviving mission in the USA, right? The Jerry McAuley Water Street Mission.
Yeah, founded in 1872.
And what's wild is that a Wall Street banker, Frederick Smith Hatch, actually donated the building. But initially, they called it the Helping Hand for Men.
Which is a very different vibe.
Totally. Helping Hand sounds very gentle. It sounds like, giving someone a quick boost over a fence. But the term that eventually stuck, rescue mission, is significantly more, violent.
It is. It implies an active, desperate pulling of someone away from imminent destruction.
So where did that word actually come from?
That shift in terminology is so crucial. The term rescue in this context didn't originate as some clever marketing rebrand. It has some really heavy historical weight. It actually came from Syracuse, New York.
Okay, Syracuse.
Yeah, under the leadership of a man named H.B. Gibbon. He had previously worked with what were known as rescue bands.
Rescue bands? Like musical groups?
No, not at all. They were active, clandestine networks connected directly with the Underground Railroad. They were dedicated to assisting and harboring fugitive slaves.
Wait, pause right there. Because the psychological leap from that is staggering. If your foundational understanding of the word rescue is rooted in the Underground Railroad.
You are talking about rescuing someone from a missed meal.
Exactly, or just a cold night.
Yeah.
You are talking about literal existential liberation. Gibbon viewed the people walking through his doors not as just unfortunate victims of bad luck, but as captives.
Right. They were fleeing bondage. And whether that bondage was addiction, trauma, or spiritual death, it was a total captivity.
And I think that framework exposes the fundamental flaw in the transactional model of charity that we see so often today.
Minor makes a very sharp, almost controversial distinction here in the text. She states that the primary objective of a rescue mission is not poverty alleviation.
Which sounds so counterintuitive.
It does. It is not about ending hunger. Now, she immediately clarifies that obviously alleviating poverty is a noble, beautiful thing. But she uses this brilliant comparison.
Let's hear it.
She says there is absolutely nothing wrong with caring for abandoned pets at an animal shelter. But if you walk into a hospital expecting them to fix your dog, you've completely misunderstood the nature of the institution.
Well, that's good.
Right. If a mission only addresses the surface issue, like the lack of a sandwich, without dealing with the core problem of human captivity, it generates zero lasting effect. The true business is changed lives. Total transformation.
So what does this all mean for the day-to-day? It sounds like if you just give someone a bed and a meal, you're basically running a human parking lot.
A human parking lot. I mean, that is a devastatingly accurate way to put it.
Yeah, you're just scoring them safely for the night. You park them in the lot, turn off the engine, lock the gates to keep the elements out. But you aren't fixing the engine.
No, not at all.
You haven't done a single thing to ensure that when they drive out of your lot the next morning, they aren't going to break down on the exact same stretch of highway they broke down on yesterday.
To avoid becoming a parking lot, an organization needs a comprehensive mechanical overhaul process for that engine. And in the text, Malcolm Lee conceptualized this through what he calls the RESCUE model.
Okay, RESCUE. Let's break that blueprint down, because I feel like acronyms can sometimes mask the sheer amount of grueling work they actually require. So start with the R.
R is release. And this isn't a passive waiting game. It means actively working to release clients from hurtful, destructive lifestyles.
So in a practical setting, what does that look like?
This means case managers sitting down and doing the incredibly difficult work of identifying toxic relationships, chemical dependencies, deep habits of self-sabotage, and then helping the client physically and psychologically separate from them.
Basically detoxifying their entire environment. Which, I mean, that sounds terrifying for the client. You're asking them to let go of literally the only coping mechanisms they know. So once you've stripped away their old life, you have this massive void. Which I guess brings us to E.
E is educate, but we're talking about dual-track education here.
What are the two tracks?
First, it's spiritual education, teaching them a new framework for understanding the world through God's word. But it is equally focused on fierce, practical education, getting a GED, learning how to pass a drug test.
Learning how to sit through a job interview without having a meltdown.
Yes, basic financial literacy, all of that.
Because knowing your spiritual worth doesn't automatically teach you how to balance a checkbook, or how to resolve a conflict with a shift manager without resorting to violence.
Right, you have to install the practical software.
Okay, so what's S?
S is serve, but with a highly specific caveat. Serving clients with changed lives as the ultimate objective.
Which loops right back to the human parking lot analogy.
Exactly. If you are serving a meal and that meal does not fit into a larger strategy of changing that person's life trajectory, you are actually just feeding the captivity.
Wow. Okay, move on to C and U.
C is cultivate. Cultivating devotion. It's moving beyond intellectual education into a genuine internalized connection. It's the difference between just knowing the rules of the shelter and genuinely desiring to live a healthy life.
Right. And U?
U is utilize. This is an operational mandate for the staff. It means aggressively utilizing all available community resources.
Like psychiatric care, vocational rehab, stuff like that.
Exactly. Legal aid, whatever it takes to restore the broken person. A mission can't just be an isolated island. It has to be a hub connected to a broader network.
And then we hit the final E, which seems to be the ultimate graduation day of this whole process.
Empower. Empowering the client to serve. The cycle isn't complete just because the client gets an apartment and a job.
It's not over.
No. The cycle is complete when the client realizes they are now equipped to reach back and help pull someone else out of the water. They transition from being the rescued to being the rescuer.
I mean, that is a staggering amount of work. To take someone from release all the way to empower requires years of sustained, agonizing effort. But here's the massive roadblock that immediately jumps out at me.
What's that?
If the goal is a completely transformed life, not just a full stomach, we have to completely change our definition of what it means to be poor. We have to look at the mental operating system the client brings through the front door.
Yes, the worldview.
Right. And I imagine that worldview is usually entirely incompatible with the whole RESCUE model.
The incompatibility is profound, actually, and it is backed by hard data in the text. The Barna Group ran a comprehensive survey in 2009 looking at how many American adults hold a strictly biblical worldview.
And how do they define that?
They defined it rigorously. Believing absolute moral truth exists, the Bible is accurate, Satan is a real force, salvation can't be earned by good works, Jesus lived a sinless life, and God is the all-knowing creator.
Okay, I'm going to guess the number of people who believe all of that is low. But how low?
9%.
Wait, really? Just 9%?
Only 9% of Americans held all those beliefs. And even if you narrow it down to people who specifically self-identified as born again, the number only bumped up to 19%.
So let's translate that statistic to the floor of the shelter. That means that 9 times out of 10, the person standing across the intake desk from a rescue worker is operating on a fundamentally secular, deeply ingrained survival worldview.
Precisely. They are operating on scripts like, the universe revolves around me and owes me, or I am only as valuable as the stuff I possess.
Or vulnerability is a death sentence, so I have to manipulate everyone around me before they manipulate me. Think about the friction that creates. Imagine a case manager trying to walk a client through the E, educating them on long-term financial saving. But the client's internal operating system says, I might be dead tomorrow, so immediate gratification is the only logical choice.
You aren't just trying to teach them math. You are warring against their fundamental understanding of reality.
Which leads us into how we define poverty, because the book gets into this idea of relational brokenness.
Yes, proposed by Brian Fikkert and Bryant Myers. This is arguably the most important paradigm shift a rescue worker has to make. We universally define poverty as a deficit of material resources, right? You don't have money, therefore you are poor.
Right.
Fikkert and Myers argue that the lack of money is merely a late-stage symptom of a much deeper disease. Poverty is actually broken relationships across 4 distinct dimensions.
Let's map those 4 dimensions out, because this redefines the entire battlefield.
The first dimension is a broken relationship with God, resulting in the poverty of spiritual intimacy. The person feels totally severed from any divine purpose. The second dimension is a broken relationship with self. This manifests as the poverty of being. It's a catastrophic collapse of self-worth. They look in the mirror and see a defect.
That poverty of being is insidious. I mean, if a client fundamentally believes they are trash and you put them in a nice, clean, transitional apartment, their internal programming will almost inevitably drive them to trash the apartment.
Because their external reality has to match their internal identity. They will sabotage the success.
Exactly. Because they don't believe they deserve it. What's the third dimension?
The third is the broken relationship with others, leading to the poverty of community. This means they have burned every bridge, exhausted every family tie, alienated every friend. They are operating totally outside the safety net of human connection.
Often surrounded only by peers who just reinforce their destructive habits, right?
Yes. And finally, the fourth dimension is a broken relationship with the rest of creation, resulting in the poverty of stewardship.
Meaning what exactly?
It's the inability to manage resources, time, talents, or opportunities. They just cannot steward what is put into their hands.
This changes everything about how we look at someone's socioeconomic status. There is this striking anecdote in the book about former Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger that perfectly illuminates this.
Oh, about his mother.
Yeah. A newspaper was doing a profile on his life and described his childhood beginnings as poor. And when his mother read the article, she was fiercely offended. She called them and insisted they correct it.
She said they were merely humble.
Right. Humble, not poor. Because from a purely material standpoint, sure, the newspaper was factually correct. They walked to church in mended clothes. They had basically zero money.
But she recognized that they possessed immense relational wealth. They had deep spiritual intimacy, a fierce sense of self-worth, a tight community. They were just experiencing a temporary lack of cash.
Exactly. They were absolutely not suffering from the poverty of being or the poverty of community. And I think if a rescue worker can internalize that distinction, it radically alters the geometry of just a simple 5-minute interaction at the front desk.
Let's revisit that man walking in out of the cold. If you are operating on the assumption that his primary problem is a lack of calories and a lack of boots, your job is purely logistical.
You process him, hand him the tray, point to bed 42, and move on.
Yes. But if you view him as suffering from poverty of being, The calculus changes completely. You realize the sandwich is just the entry fee to access his relational brokenness.
So you look him in the eye, you ask for his name, you treat him with profound dignity while handing him the sandwich.
You are actively treating the broken relationship with self while simultaneously treating the symptom of hunger.
But let's be incredibly honest here. Doing that once is beautiful. Doing that 50 times a night, 5 nights a week, with people who are deeply traumatized, that sounds impossible.
It's exhausting.
How does a worker actually sustain that level of engagement without shattering? This brings us to the core methodology of the book. Servant leadership, modeled by Jesus.
And we really have to reclaim that term, because servant leadership has been thoroughly hijacked by the modern business world. They think they invented it.
Right, every corporate seminar has a book on it.
They present it as this cutting-edge hack to increase employee productivity. But Jesus was demonstrating the pure version of this 2,000 years ago.
What's the fundamental difference then between the corporate hack and the Jesus model?
The foundational difference is the directional flow of the service. Corporate servant leadership usually suggests serving your employees so they will serve your bottom line. Servant leadership, Jesus style, insists that you must serve God first.
That's the immovable priority.
Yes. Jesus consistently demonstrated that his primary objective was obedience to the Father. And it is only because of that upward service that a leader is empowered to serve man without needing applause or instant success.
Wait, hold on. I need to challenge that because from a secular perspective, that sounds like you are bypassing the client. If my goal is to help the guy in front of me, shouldn't my primary focus be the bleeding man on the floor?
It sounds counterintuitive, but if your primary focus is the bleeding man on the floor will eventually destroy you.
How so?
Because here is the mechanical reality of rescue work. Gratitude is rare. Instant success is almost non-existent. You are dealing with people who will lie to you, scream at you, and relapse after you have poured hundreds of hours into them.
So if you are serving them to get validation from them.
Your emotional stability is entirely dependent on the behavior of an addict. You will burn out in a month. But if your fundamental posture is, I report to God, I am serving God by caring for this broken person, then you don't need their immediate compliance.
Your performance review is coming from a completely different authority.
Exactly. You are detached from the need for their validation, which ironically allows you to love them far more patiently.
That detachment fundamentally changes how you wield authority. What's fascinating here is how Jesus used his power. He didn't use it to be bossy or enforce compliance. He used it to empower others.
And empowering agency inherently means giving people the room to make catastrophic mistakes.
Like Peter walking on water.
Yes. Peter sees Jesus on the water and says, "Call me out there." Now, Jesus possesses total omniscience. He knows Peter is going to take his eyes off the goal, look at the wind, and sink into the freezing sea.
Here's where it gets really interesting. As a rescue worker, you see a client making a terrible mistake. They say, "I'm ready to get my own apartment," but you know their budget and their coping skills, and you know they're going to sink.
It is an agonizing tension.
The human instinct is to jump in, grab the wheel, and fix it for them. How hard is it to just stand back and let them sink a little?
It's emotional torture. But Jesus says, come. He lets Peter step out. He lets him experience the terrifying consequence of failure. Because Jesus knew that experiential failure was a far more profound teacher than a lecture ever could have been.
You cannot learn that the wind is dangerous by having someone tell you about the wind. You have to feel it knock you down.
Right, and you provide the safety net. Jesus caught Peter. He didn't let him drown. But you do not prevent the fall. You have to allow a client to arrive at healthiness on their own timing rather than forcing compliance.
Standing back and letting people fail while absorbing their relational trauma every day takes a massive psychological toll on the worker. How do they survive without burning out? Let's talk about the internal battle.
The book dedicates significant space to this because if the worker falls apart, the mission ceases to exist. It starts by identifying the massive backpack of fear workers carry.
The book lists some very common fears. Fear of physical harm, fear of messing up someone's life.
The burden of playing God with limited information.
Yeah. Fear of inadequate resources and fear of not earning trust.
You carry all of that for 40 hours a week and it ferments into deep toxic frustration. To intercept this, the text introduces the GETREA acronym developed by Cord Cochran.
Walk me through the mechanics of this system. A client just screamed in my face, my blood pressure is through the roof. What do I do?
G is give everything to God. Transfer the ownership of the crisis. E is earnestly seek his wisdom on how to de-escalate. T is train yourself to apply it. training the muscle memory of peace.
But when adrenaline is flooding your system, that seems hard. The next steps seem much more surgical.
They are. R is recognize the emotion. Name it. I am furious right now. Then E, evaluate the emotion. This requires brutal self-honesty. Are you frustrated because the client is destroying their life or because they embarrassed you and hurt your ego?
Oh, that is devastating. Because 90% of the time I'm mad because my ego took a hit. I made a beautiful spreadsheet for their recovery and they ruined my spreadsheet.
Exactly. Then A is address it. Set a healthy boundary. And finally, L is leave it. Once the interaction is over, you cannot carry the emotional residue into the next interaction.
Because if you don't leave it, you accumulate it.
Yeah.
And that leads to compassion fatigue, which is so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's when a worker feels entirely empty of the desire to help.
We need to differentiate compassion fatigue from standard burnout. Burnout is physical exhaustion. Compassion fatigue is a spiritual necrosis. You look at a bleeding person and feel absolutely nothing.
Lorraine Minor, the author, actually shares her own personal testimony about this from 1980. After 3 years of pulling 60-hour weeks, she hit total burnout.
She did. She says God systematically shut down her schedule with canceled appointments, forcing her to sit in silence.
And she realized she was trying to generate her own compassion, which is impossible. You can't be the reservoir of water. You just have to be the hose.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. You have to go to the faucet every morning to get filled up by God's compassion because your personal supply will run dry by Tuesday.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, recognizing you are the hose and not the ultimate savior of the client is actually the most freeing realization a worker can have. It establishes healthy boundaries.
Okay, so once your internal boundaries are set, you have to navigate the most difficult external tightrope in ministry. Balancing grace with truth, helping versus hurting.
It is the ultimate high wire act. You have grace and mercy on one side, truth and justice on the other.
Randy Alcorn is quoted in the text saying, "If we minimize grace, the world sees no hope for salvation. If we minimize truth, the world sees no need for salvation."
Exactly. And finding that balance brings us to the trap of when helping is actually hurtful. Giving a handout without requiring participation is crippling. The text contrasts doing for a client with doing with a client.
Wait, so is it wrong to just give someone a pair of boots if they need them? When does a gift become a crutch?
Emergency triage is always the exception. If a man is freezing to death, give him the boots. But the danger lies in making emergency triage the permanent operational model.
So what's the danger of doing for them constantly?
Doing for someone creates dependence and compliance. It communicates, I don't believe you are competent enough to navigate the world, so I will do it for you.
It's exactly like helicopter parenting. If you do your kid's science project for them, they get an A today, but it ensures they fail chemistry tomorrow.
That analogy maps perfectly onto social work. Doing with a client creates cooperation and true surrender. It means sitting on your hands while they struggle to fill out their own housing application.
Because if you do too much for them, the mission inadvertently breeds an entitlement mentality.
Entitlement is the antithesis of continuous improvement. If they feel owed a bed and meals, why would they endure the pain of rehab?
The antidote to entitlement, the text insists, is fostering an attitude of profound gratitude.
Yes, but you can't just command a room full of traumatized people to drop their entitlement and show gratitude. They'll laugh in your face.
So, practically speaking, how does a worker actually teach these massive concepts to someone who is deeply disengaged or defensive? The book introduces this incredibly cool concept of word pictures.
Instead of preaching a boring sermon, staff use everyday objects to break through defenses.
Let's banter through a few of these because they are brilliant. The styrofoam cup. A client is mashing a cup in anger.
And the worker walks up, ignores the bad behavior, and says, we never care about the cup itself, only what's inside it.
The Bible says you are a clay vessel, and the treasure inside is what God values. Boom. Defense is bypassed. What about the Velcro?
Dealing with a difficult person. Picture 2 pieces of Velcro with all those tiny hooks. When angry people interact, they hook into each other.
But if one piece is melty smooth by God's love, the other person's anger can't hook onto you. It just slides off.
Exactly. And the iceberg metaphor shows that discipleship isn't just cleaning the 1/5 above the water, it's healing the 4/5 hidden below the trauma and shame.
This raises an important question, though. Why not just tell them the facts?
Because clients have a truth shortage and a shame buildup. When you've lived in an ecosystem of lies, direct truth feels like an attack, and shame makes them terrified of failure.
Resistance isn't necessarily rebellion, it's a defense mechanism.
Yes. If we extrapolate this to the section on holidays, why do clients act out or resist help during Christmas?
Because holidays trigger massive shame and grief over past mistakes and lost family.
Exactly. By understanding the root of the resistance, the worker can reframe the holiday as an opportunity for new traditions, rather than forcing false cheer, which just causes an explosion.
To summarize this massive journey, rescue mission work is not about managing poverty. It is about restoring the image of God in broken people through the delicate, grueling, and beautiful balance of grace and truth.
And I always come back to Maurice Vanderburg's powerful quote from the end of the text. Whenever a client goes AWOL or fails, remember, the last chapter's not written yet.
The last chapter's not written yet. Think about your own life, your own workplace, or your own family. Are you doing for the people you love and secretly resenting them for it? Or are you doing with them, allowing them the dignity of their own struggle? Tomorrow, when you encounter someone difficult, ask yourself, is my Velcro melted or am I letting them hook me?
That's the real test. Thank you for taking this extended time to explore these complex, life-altering concepts with us. We strongly encourage you to take these principles of servant leadership, Jesus style, out of the theoretical realm and ruthlessly apply them directly to your own relationships and environments.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep seeking truth, keep offering unmerited grace, and we will catch you next time.